I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey y'all, I'm Molly Barrows, and welcome to Gulf Coast Confidential, the podcast where we cover some of the most scandalous crimes and cases that bubble up in Northwest Florida and beyond. Joining me as usual is Pam Hill, pharmacist, victims advocate, and survivor of violent crime in her own family. And no one knows what some of these families that we talk about go through any better than Pam. And some of these are pretty wet the feezy type cases.
They are. They're just unbelievable. And it's regular folks just doing regular things, dealing with extraordinary situations.
Yes, and that's going to be the focus of this story that we're talking about today. This episode is called Suicide by Text, the Conrad Roy case. And it basically centers around, can a person convince someone to kill themselves and be charged with a crime? But before we get into this, we do want to tell you a little bit about some other what the feezy cases that we're working on. There's no shortage of them, that's for sure. Locally, right here in the Panhandle, like we've talked about before, we have some crazy crime cases or just scandalous cases that pop up and end up making national news. So we're going to revisit some of those, some older ones like former Mobile County Commissioner Steve Nodine. His case was featured on 48 Hours and some other national news shows because his girlfriend, Angel Downs, was found with a bullet wound to her head shortly after he left her house that night. So he was tried for her murder. We're going to update you on, we'll revisit that case and update you on where he is now. Of course, he was not convicted of that, but it was such a sensational case at the time. And then also recently, tragically, we have had a young airman that was shot to death in Okaloosa County, Florida, also right here in Northwest Florida on the Gulf Coast. And that's caused a lot of controversy. So that's another one that we're working on, along with several other national cases, too.
Definitely. Every time I go over to Fort Morgan or Orange Beach, I think about that case with Steve Nodine.
Yes.
Yeah, every time, because I was over there a lot during that time. But anyway, we've also got some others that aren't local. The Chris Greger trial, that's a dad that had his little 6-year-old son running on a treadmill because he told him it's too fat, and he just ran him to death. And the little boy died.
Oh, Pam, no.
It's terrible. And the man didn't come into the child's life till he was about 4 years old.
Oh, well, thank goodness.
Yeah, right. But I mean, it's heartbreaking. We're working on that one. We're also working on Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow Daybell.
Ugh, those two.
Right. And there's the story about Karen Reed, and that's either called Kill or Cover Up. She's being charged with backing up over her policeman boyfriend, and leaving him in the cold to die. That's what she's charged with. But up in the Commonwealth, where she's at in Massachusetts, it has divided the whole town. And there are a lot of people that think that there's a cover-up by the police department. So, I mean, it's almost 50-50 down there. Then you throw in this character called Turtle Boy, who knows how to do podcast and marketing and image and stuff. So you see her going into court every day, and she's a pretty lady, sophisticated. I think she was a professor. And it just looks like you're going into a pep rally.
Wow.
It's unreal. And so we got a lot of other things going on like that. Corey Richens, her little famous, fabulous attorney, has asked to be dismissed. So we've got that going on too. Just a lot of stuff.
I know. And also our mom influencer turned kid torturer.
Oh, Ruby Frankie.
Yeah, so there's an update on her too, her journal.
And Jody Hildebrandt. Yeah, her journal is wicked. I can't even believe anybody with sense would even think those things, or anybody with any values or morals, much less write them down.
I know. And speaking of questioning why people do things that they do and then write it down, that's the perfect segue to talk about what we're talking about today. Again, this is such a sad story. We're talking about the suicide suicide of Conrad Roy. And it was actually 10 years ago this July that Michelle Carter, who was Conrad's girlfriend, she was 17 at the time, he was 18, that basically he had suicidal thoughts, and it got to the point where he climbed into his truck in a Kmart parking lot and was attempting to commit suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. He was talking to her. She had been encouraging him to do it, according to prosecutors. And then when he crawled out of the truck, had second thought, she told him to get back in, basically to finish the job. So this is such a tragic story, Pam. I mean, I can't imagine being his family, and it just hurts my heart knowing that somebody was right there telling him to not do what, something that goes against your very instinct. You're trying to kill yourself. He comes to his senses in some ways, or perhaps realizes what it'll do to his family as well. And then she just tells him to do it again. So, but a lot of the evidence that the prosecutors used was what she wrote down in text, and also the conversations that she had with him on the phone.
Right. And the story starts like this. They're teenagers. Both of them are teenagers. Conrad Roy, he had his captain's tugboat license before he even graduated out of high school.
Yeah, and they're in Massachusetts too.
Right. So, I mean, I think that's pretty accomplished. He did that at night school in 3 or 4 months. So, and his family was into the maritime lifestyle. So he was basically fulfilling a legacy. But he always kind of, he had thoughts and stuff. I wrote them down right here. He kind of had teenage angst, but more than that. He said, "My life's an abortion." And that made me so sad to hear that. I just feel like my life's a joke. The negative thoughts he had. And then he met Michelle. He met her when they were down here in Florida on vacation. And they talked on the beach and did that fun little flirting where their hearts all went pitter-patter and all that kind of fun stuff you do, especially if you're at the beach and it's lovely.
And you're young.
Yeah. And then so they found out they lived about 30 minutes apart where they're at.
Back home in Massachusetts.
And so when they're back, they start texting. And, texting is very private. And parents can do almost anything they want to do, but this texting still goes on. And people know how to hide it behind another app or this, that, and the other. But I don't think they were hiding it that much as that it's so easy to do. Kids can just do it so fast.
And it comes naturally.
Right.
And I think about that too. I mean, they say that the difference between men and women is men like to see what's attractive to them, that's appealing, and that women, it's what they hear. And so I think a lot of times with texting, it's a little bit of both. You get to see, you get to hear, and you're sharing your innermost thoughts a good bit of the time. So it's almost as personal as writing letters back and forth back in the day. So for them, I think it does sound like it was initially puppy love. And there was just,
puppy love.
And there was just that fun, easy way to connect, and then to see something in writing, again, it keeps the heart pitter-pattering.
Right. And they're on family trips. He's with his family, she's with her family, and they meet on the beach. It's kind of romantic sounding. And plus with texting, you can reread it and romanticize it. And it's lovely in your head. You can read anything. That's one thing that's dangerous about texting too, is if you don't put punctuation, or if you don't put an emoji, or if you do put an emoji, it can just be so misconstrued.
Very true.
So they go back, and he has a good mom and dad. The dad's a little bit rough. I think the dad probably did that man stuff. I don't know what it is, tough guy stuff. And the granddad was like that too.
Well, they did a marine salvage business.
There you
and
go.
He worked for them, I believe, in that. And I saw that too, like in court documents, they said that dad may have been a little rough with him.
But the mom, she loved and adored him. And it was, he was sweet, and he was good, and he was kind, and all the things and he was a cute little guy.
He was cute.
And tall and
sweet.
Strong. Yeah. So, I mean, it was his inner self-talk that I think was his biggest
enemy.
Yeah, his biggest enemy. And this phone right here was the weapon. All of us have this weapon readily available to us, and it can also be a help too. But.
Yes, you and I talked about that. I thought that was a good analogy, because really it's a weapon in so many ways, like whether it's predators preying on unsuspecting children, if it's catfish adults trying to prey on other people, scam them, it's all hiding behind these phones and pretending to be something you're not. And it is a weapon when somebody has that kind of a heart.
Right, definitely. Well, and then like Conrad, he was just like, I need to relax. I think we can all relate to that. And his friends were they were like, he's been in a little dark mood or this, that, and the other. And Conrad had tried before to overdose on acetaminophen or Tylenol. And so that's on his record. And so you have this never my kid type of thing, but things like that can happen. So he was dissatisfied with something was bothering him. And I don't know exactly what it was, other than his mom said he always wanted to be good and the best. And good is so subjective. It's not that you're bad, but I mean, what are we measuring ourselves against? Something unreal. I just don't know.
Right. Is it perfectionism? Is it trying to earn love for yourself?
Right.
Do you not feel worthy without performing, kind of a thing?
Yeah. Because like I said, there was nothing wrong with the way he looked or talked or his intelligence or something. And then I think when he got this, and to call them boyfriend and girlfriend, the parents of Conrad kind of take a little bit of exception to that, because they've only seen each other 5 times.
It wasn't that formal.
Right.
It was more of they have this texting relationship.
Right. Which that can be as real to people. I know grown people that
Certainly.
do that, people that communicate with people in prison or another country, or, all
Or
kind of
again, all the
stuff.
people that get scammed over someone they think they know.
Exactly.
Sending money, draining their bank accounts, undermining their investments just to give money to someone they've never met but think they know because they've been promised love.
Right. Or the prince from Zimbabwe. That's
Right.
will help
You mean
everybody.
that's not real, Pam?
It's not real. I hate that
Holy
you did that,
smokes.
but it's not.
So yes, it's unfortunate that sometimes people do put more trust and belief in these words than perhaps they should, because
Right.
words apparently can kill.
Oh, they can. And they can soothe. They can be wonderful. And they do matter. But a lot of times with teenagers, I mean, they're just learning a lot of things and don't know how things are going to go over. Like, for instance, Conrad's mom had worked in a psychiatric hospital, and this happened to her child. It just can be so subtle and insidious. She never dreamed that this would happen. She knew her child was sad maybe, or depressed. And when we bring that up, both of these folks, Michelle and Conrad, were both on antidepressants. Michelle had been on Prozac before, and then she got put on Celexa, and that is an antidepressant. And Conrad was on Celexa as well. And one thing with the antidepressants, they're called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They try to keep a little bit more of that feeling that we have, that, when we see a child or a puppy or a sunset or the beach or something.
Something positive or happy.
Because, I mean, you see it and you go, why am I happy seeing that puppy? It's just a chemical in your body that comes out. And when you're depressed or tired or overworked or overworried, that neurotransmitter doesn't stay between the neurons for very long. So what these drugs in that category do, they help to keep some of that in between the neurons, so it keeps bombarding back and forth. However, with Celexa, or the generic name citalopram, and it has a black box warning on the paperwork and the package insert. And that black box warning is to the effect that be careful using it in people that are under 24 years old, because there is an increased ideations or thoughts of suicide. So that was really something to think about and look at. So
yeah, I thought that was interesting. I did read where one of the attorneys wanted to put that in there, basically. They wanted to talk about how that could have influenced, and the judge said, no, that would be more speculation. But it is interesting that they were both on it and under that age, 24.
Right. And during the time of this trial, it might have been speculative, but nowadays I think that they could have used that as basically a defense for her and a reason for him. And we like to have a reason, and we like to have a defense. So that, I think nowadays that would have been a different outcome. And also some of the legal wranglings with this was her attorney's like, hey, she's got First Amendment rights to say whatever she wants to.
I know.
And text,
Crazy.
I guess, whatever she wants. And for some reason, that incensed me when I heard that. Because just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should.
Right. Well, then you just undermined everybody's defense in every criminal case in the world, because you're like, well, we just got to say there might be an alternative that's believable to the jury. Doesn't mean that we think it's believable necessarily. But yeah, I know it is frustrating. And I think, it's frustrating too, like you were saying earlier, for his parents. They didn't feel like that they was actually, to call them boyfriend and girlfriend was perhaps too heavy of a label, that it was just more this texting relationship. So let's talk a little bit about the day he died before we get into some more of those texts, because they do use that in the trial a lot.
Well, Also, just to back up just a second, when they were in Florida, the mother had one of her best days with Conrad because she said, and she just kept saying it because it was so beautiful to her. She said, we ate tortillas and he tried guacamole and he loved it. So it just made her so happy.
Yes.
That's the thing that they remember. But on the day that he had been texting back and forth with Michelle talking about what he said, my life's a joke, this, that, and the other. And he said, I want to kill myself. She said, well, it's so easy. Do whatever you want. And I've got it like here. She basically is like, hang yourself, stab yourself, jump off a building. I don't know. There are a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's interesting because they talked about how in 2014, that's when the switch came, that the text showed that prior to that, from the time they met at the beach and connected afterwards, that there were texts back and forth. And she realized that he did have this propensity to have these dark thoughts and was thinking along suicide. And her initial texts were, please don't do that, encouraging him not to do it. But that something changed in 2014. And she decided that it would be helping him to encourage him to die. So, yeah, it was, I think, July of 2014 when apparently all that encouragement was effective.
It changed then. He told his mom, he said, I'm going out to meet some friends. And she said, will you be back for dinner? He said, I think so. Those were his last words. So I think so. So there he goes. And he's telling her, he's so smart. He's worked on around the boats and the tugboats and stuff. He had put a little generator in the cab of his truck, just right here behind him. And so he knew if he turned that on and sat in the car with that he could just go to sleep. So he did that. He went to a Kmart parking lot that was kind of abandoned. He parked his truck there, and he gets in there, and he's texting with her all this time too. And I find it interesting that they're texting instead of talking on the phone, because you can dial someone. And if someone was telling me those dark thoughts, I would be talking to them on the phone, I think. But I'm a 65-year-old woman. But I think when I was a teenager, I'd have thought this too. I really do. And I'd have been on my phone driving to them. But so he's on and off and this, that, and the other. Then at some point, he gets out of the truck. After he's taken off his cross and, he's obviously doing some things just to self-soothe for a minute. And he gets out of the truck. And so she tells him to get back in and to, man up, basically. Are you going to do it or not? So he gets back in. And you know what happens after this, after he's been in there with the generator running and the carbon monoxide, he just goes to sleep.
Oh my gosh, that is just tragic to me that she told him to get back in the truck. I don't know how you can do that to someone. You must not truly have, part of me thinks you just don't truly have any grasp of what you're doing, that you have an agenda that's entirely not based in reality.
Definitely. I think his thoughts had gotten so confused and disassociated, and yet he had told her at one point when he was talking about my life's a joke, this, that, and the other, that he said, we could be like Romeo and Juliet, and she wasn't having that. We know how that is.
She was okay with him being Romeo.
Right, exactly. Well, and then she kind of got it together to realize,
Ophelia in that matter, and she wasn't going to be Ophelia. He was.
Definitely. But see, to me, that shows that she had some thought of she didn't want to die, and he was just having those thoughts like that. And that's what, it's so hard to tell teenagers, tell me what you're thinking, because they just won't sometimes. But I think in this case, the mother, she didn't have any idea. This mother would have moved heaven and earth for him. She just would have. And she was a sweet, sweet lady. Her name was Lynn, is Lynn. And she said, I didn't even know Michelle until she came up to me at Conrad's funeral. And she came up to the mama like they were best friends, and that she was so sad and sorrowful. Even one of Conrad's sisters said she was playing the part of a grieving widow. And what had happened during all this, what we haven't said is that when all this was going on, Michelle's texting her other friends too, going, "Oh my gosh, he's in the car. Oh my gosh, he said he's going to kill himself. Oh my gosh," on and on and on, because she was attention seeking.
Right. Why wouldn't you call his parents if you were so close? Why wouldn't you go down there?
Right.
Why wouldn't you certainly tell him to turn around and stop?
Because that wouldn't have created the teenage drama or angst or in the know or the I'm bereft or what have you. Look at my boyfriend.
Special.
Right. My boyfriend, he killed himself. All that there. But as she was doing that, her friends were like, "What's the matter with you?" type of thing, because she was basically an encourager. She was voted most likely to brighten your day. Can you imagine?
God, that's got to be like a knife to the heart for his mom.
Definitely. I just can't even imagine. But I kind of, the judge in this case, he was not playing. He wasn't playing with her. He wasn't playing with the First Amendment. He wasn't playing with the Celexa. He wasn't playing with any of it.
Right.
Because he told her, when he broke the chain of causation, when he got out of the truck and you told him to get back in, that is what made you an accomplice to this.
Absolutely, because she was indicted in February the following year, arraigned in Massachusetts on charges of involuntary manslaughter. Also, the grand jury found enough to charge her with wantonly and recklessly assisting the suicide. And then I think because she was designated a youthful offender rather than a juvenile, that also made it so that she could be sentenced as an adult. So it sounds like the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was like, we own this.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because,
we do see a pattern here. This is a problem. You did contribute to his death. And like you said, the judge saw it too.
Oh, that's what he was doing. Because if we just said, "Oh, well, that's okay." We've talked about the bad nurse, the nurse that just went in there killing people because he thought he could put them out of their misery, or he just wanted to. When people think that they can do anything they want to and not have any consequences for it, other people are going to start doing it.
That's exactly right. Well, this judge found her guilty, which I thought was interesting. She didn't want a jury trial.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, people don't realize that judge, they do realize that a lot of the emotion is taken out of it without a jury, and you don't have different opinions. But when you get a judge that's made up his mind, or he has his experiences and biases, it can come down hard that way too.
Yes, and it's interesting because I think there was a lot of talk about whether or not it would be a legally precedent-setting case, but it wasn't federal per se, so it doesn't have an impact necessarily on other cases. But it is one of those that makes you say, hey, can you be responsible in this age of technology when phones can be weapons? How much are you responsible for contributing to someone's suicide? Can that be criminally defined? Because even though she was found guilty, she was only sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, which was later reduced to like 15 months. She's now out. She was released in January of 2020. And so I imagine for his parents, that's got to feel, I think they were quoted as saying they were happy with the verdict. Happy might not be the right word, but satisfied. And I think, it's tragic for everyone really in all those situations. But still, if that had been my daughter, that someone had said those words to her and encouraged her to get back into a truck full of poisonous fumes, I'd be clamoring for a lot more than 2.5 years.
Oh, yeah.
And being out at 15 months, I probably would feel very unsatisfied.
Right. Well, she actually got out after 11 because they gave her time off for good behavior.
Yeah, 3 months early.
And I was telling you earlier, I noticed that a lot of people on a lot of these rooms where they chat about, or these posts where they chat about a case, they were like, why did she change her eyebrows? Because she was a pretty girl. There's no doubt about that. She had changed her eyebrows to be so dark and sort of block, and she'd gotten her hair cut, and she had a different, she didn't have that sachet that she had, that feminine sachet. It wasn't exactly like, like a guy walking, but it was just more business-like or what have you. There's a lot of things that changed that you can't understand. And
sounds like they didn't want her to be perceived as a femme fatale.
I think so. I think that, or like the vixen, or the he couldn't help but do what she said, type of thing would be the prosecution.
He wouldn't listen to this frumpy old girl.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they kind of did there.
It's all on him. And that is what the defense attorney tried to say quite a bit, that this is, he said, if you take it as a whole, where she originally texted him saying, don't give in to your dark thoughts, and then come full circle to saying, do give in, they were like, more or less, she really was against it. And I'm like, well, more or less, he's dead.
Right.
Yeah. And so, and she was right there at the end. It's just, that hurt my heart so bad. I remember when this case happened, and it just, I remember even taking a trip to the Boston area around that time when the trial was about to start, and people were talking about the case, and there was a young man in our group that was talking about it, like, I don't understand. I guess they'd kind of dated and they'd broken up, and so we didn't really follow it that closely at that time. Didn't even realize they weren't that close. But the perception being, and I think there were some other cases that happened around that time too that were similar. And maybe there was another case of a girl who encouraged her boyfriend to end his life, and they had more of a serious relationship, and it had ended badly. But we were talking about, I said, whatever happened to just breaking up with somebody?
Yeah, and moving on.
Right. Why does it have to be you've got to end their life? And that just seems to be that disconnect with reality of A, not appreciating the life you've been given, B, really fully understanding the consequences of what you're doing, and just this desire for attention. And I'm thinking of her, to let that be your driving force to the point that someone dies as a result. Again, 11 months, 15 months, that ain't much.
Right. Unreal. Well, and that's what they said. What is the motive of here? And attention seeking. That's the motive. A motive doesn't have to be this big, elaborate legal term. She's attention seeking. And her parents stood behind her, but I could tell her parents, they were like, oh my goodness. They weren't like sending up fireworks and everything, but they were glad that she didn't get that much of time. But, this is called mariticide. Killing of one's husband or boyfriend, and she didn't necessarily do it with a knife. She didn't do it with a gun. This was the weapon of choice right here. And unbeknownst to her, I think her mind was cluttered and confused, and because I wish she would have done that encouraging on the end instead of the beginning, because we can't place wherever it has to go. So I think that, this texting, we got another case coming up we're doing, the catfish mom, the mom that was sending thousands of texts to her own daughter during school because she was getting a little bit jealous because her daughter's growing up and she wanted to spend time with her. And her mom was a teacher at the school. So this weren't just a few messages between Conrad and Michelle. These were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages.
Like brainwashing.
Right, exactly. So that's what I look at it as. And that's why I think parents like, get off your phone, because that's a lot of thoughts coming in. If someone tells you something. Programming. Right, exactly. Over and over and over. So I'm not a mommy, so I don't have to stay on a child about that, but I can see why parents do.
Yes, and that would be my takeaway, and it sounds like yours as well. Obviously, the age-old, what are your kids doing? What are they up to? Who are they talking to? A lot of that's basic. We all do the best we can. We're all busy, some more so than others. So I understand it. I am a parent. I am a mom. My daughter does have a phone. We restrict it immensely as far as her online abilities. But she does text back and forth with her friends. And I'll be the first to say I fail on the job. I mean, she's right now 12 years old, so she pretty freely tells me everything. So I feel. But I know the day will come when she's going to be like, nah, I probably ought not to share that.
You get the edited version.
Right.
I'll tell you a little bit, Mommy. But, it is something. And I know that neither one of these parents thought this could ever happen. And we got to be careful not to blame the parents. I think and think about what could we have done differently.
I know. Well, it is. It's tragic, and I hate that it ended that way. But I guess if there's any silver lining to be taken from this, they did start a scholarship in his name, and his family, I think, was doing everything they can to have his memory be a light and something positive for the community.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And he loved his sisters, and he loved his mom and dad, and he was a good person.
All right. Well, Pam, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us. That is it for Suicide by Text, the Conrad Roy case. And thanks for joining us on this episode of Gulf Coast Confidential. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher, Pam Hill. And a big thanks, as always, to director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. And remember, you can listen to more of our Gulf Coast Confidential episodes wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. You can also watch on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We love it.
That's right. Subscribe, comment, and follow.
Absolutely. Sounds good. All right, we'll see you next time.